Hi, I'm meteorologist Jennifer Perez, and this is What's Up with the Weather. In this installment, I'm going to talk about hail and how hail forms within a storm. Hail is a type of precipitation found in convective storms. So these storms are storms with a lot of unstable air or a lot of energy at the ground, which helps fuel the storm and eventually the development of hail. But here is the setup for that to happen. Here's your thunderstorm. You have a warm, moist inflow of air coming from the ground, generally known as the updraft. A strong updraft will allow that stone to continue to bounce around within the storm and continue to grow. In the upper portions of the storm, you have strong winds at the top of that cloud, and that's going to allow a lot of the cloud cover and a lot of that warm, moist air to get pushed forward in front of the storm, pretty much leading to a clear path for that warm, moist air to continue to get funneled in and out of the storm. So it continues to provide energy to keep the storm healthy and going. But the key ingredient is a low freezing level. Here's your freezing level. The freezing level marks the point where the temperature within the cloud gets to about 32 degrees. So freezing, and then above it is cold air within that cloud. So essentially a low freezing level means that you will eventually have a wider area within that storm cloud for that hailstone to continue to bounce around within the storm. So if you were to have a freezing level a little bit higher up, well, then you don't have enough cold air for that hailstone to bounce around in. And if it falls, it will start to melt by the time it reaches the surface. So ideally a low freezing level so there's enough area of cold air for that stone to get bounced around within the storm. That's probably the main key component, but there are other ingredients necessary for hailstones to develop and for hail to actually get large. The second one is elevation. So the higher the terrain, the closer it is going to be to the freezing level. So large hail tends to form out in mountainous areas, places like the Rockies, where the elevation of the land up there is actually higher and closer towards the freezing level. So when that hailstone falls, it doesn't have too much of a distance to fall before it reaches the surface, pretty much staying in its original size and intact for it to get large enough. Also, you need CAPE and you need wind shear. We briefly talked about CAPE and wind shear in a previous segment, but here's a quick recap. CAPE is just a measurement that we utilize to be able to identify how unstable the air is at the ground. When I mean unstable, what I mean is how much energy is at the ground. And ideally for large hail, you want CAPE levels to at least be higher than 2,000 joules per kilogram. So you want it to fall in the moderate to strong categories, if not extreme, for very, very large hail. And then there is shear. Remember, wind shear ideally is the change of winds and the change of wind speed with height. So as you go up vertically, and that's going to allow that stone, that hailstone, to get bounced around within the thunderstorm. So those are some of the key components for ingredients for hail to actually form within a thunderstorm. But there are two different processes for it to actually grow. So the first process is called the dry growth process, and that's where water vapor quickly transitions over to ice. So it goes from the water vapor stage to the ice into a solid stage. So that is known as deposition. With this type of process, the hailstone will have a white and dull appearance. Okay, so that's how it will look like. A little bit more white, more opaque, and dull. Again, that's where water vapor transitions straight into ice, basically the solid state known as deposition. So there is another process for hail to actually grow. It's called the wet growth stage. Within this stage, the key component is water droplets. The way it works is water droplets bounce around and they hit the stone, and eventually a wet coating glazes the stone around it. And as it continues to bounce around within the storm and within cold air, eventually it will freeze. So those water droplets freeze onto the hailstone. Now you can tell that this was the process for how a stone developed or how it formed if it looks clear and if the appearance is actually shinier. So you want a shiny and a clear appearance to that hailstone as compared to the dry growth process where that hailstone looks more white and dull. Again, the wet growth process, the stone looks clear and shiny. So let's dive into the cloud to see how it all comes together. So within the storm cloud, you have that strong updraft of warm, moist air. That strong inflow is going to allow the hailstone to get bounced around up and down through that cloud and up and down within that cold area of air within the cloud above the freezing level. And as it does so, it continues to go up and down, taking a couple of trips, and as it does so, it will continue to grow larger and larger and larger. And you can actually probably tell how many trips it took within the storm cloud because it gains rings. So there are hail rings that form around the hailstone just like tree rings. And if you cut the hailstone up, you can probably guesstimate how many trips it took within the storm cloud. But then the hailstone gets too heavy and too large. And at that point, that's when the weight of it overcomes the inflow of the updraft and the stone gets too heavy and too big. It falls to the earth and to the ground's surface. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can actually measure the hailstone once it falls towards the ground. You can obviously use a ruler or a tape measure to check out the size of it, but you can also compare and contrast it with certain objects. We look at the size of hail and we kind of categorize it in different categories. Everything from pea-sized hail all the way up to about softball-sized hail and grapefruit-sized hail. Now that hail is about 4.5 inches. Softball-sized hail is about 4 inches. All the way down to pea-sized hail, which is 1/4 of an inch in size. So it is more common here in the UP to see pea-sized hail up to about 1/4 of an inch of hail. So this is on the low end of the levels of severity for these hailstones. But if you head off to the plains or the mountainous areas of the Rockies, that's where you will tend to see large hail, like baseball-sized hail or softball-sized hail, if all the right conditions come together. So it is not common to see very large hail in the UP. Generally, it is more common to see these small size hail. Penny, pea-sized hail, nickel-sized hail. Now here's a fun little project for you to do to be able to see how devastating hail damage could actually be. So what you want to do is you want to get a styrofoam board and aluminum foil. You wrap the board with the aluminum foil when there's a storm that's coming and there's hail that's expected, just put it out. And then once the hailstone falls onto the board and the storm is over and done with, you can go outside and you can look at the dent and you can see the size of the dent and you can actually measure it, and that gives you an idea of how destructive hail actually can be. And that's also a great reminder to make sure that you have your cars insured for hail damage. So that does it for how hail forms. The next topic I'm going to cover is going to be on tornadoes.